Here's the Canon RF 16mm 2.8 prime lens. This was pretty cheap relative to RF mounts right now for full frame. This is around $300. The diameter here on the ring, if you want to screw in a filter, it's 43mm, which is pretty small. This is a very small lens. I'm going to compare this lens to my trusty EF 16 to 35mm f4. This is the cheaper EF wide-angle zoom lens. This is not the 2.8. You know, the 2.8 has EF version 3 right now. And there's also the RF versions of this lens, which is the 15 to 35, and I think there's a 14 to something. But those are, you know, expensive. It's like $2,000. This is, I think I got this for $800. I don't know how much it is now. You could probably find this used, but it's at f4, not f2.8. So what I wanted to do is, I have my Canon R5, and I wanted to test these two at 16mm on the zoom, and then just, you know, 16 here. And I did a few video shots and then still photography. In the still photography, I've already noticed that there is heavy distortion for photography. In camera, the R5 seems to correct it fairly okay, but then once I brought it into Lightroom, not so much. I'll show you a raw photo of it a little later on with some of my commentary, but you can see the size difference. If you just wanted 16mm on an RF, oh, and this is not even, you can't even put this directly on an RF. You need an adapter. So let me show you what it looks like with an adapter. Even though this is a zoom and it's not, you know, the same, it's not apples to apples, but if you just wanted it for 16mm, just look at the difference here. The size difference. It weighs a lot more. Yeah. In fact, the 16mm is roughly the size of the adapter, the EF to RF adapter. That's how small this is. So it's really great if you put it on a gimbal. This would probably be really good on the new APS-C sized RF cameras that have been coming out, like the R7. Now I'm going to start with photography first. This is the 16mm prime, and you could see a little bit of a distortion on the corners. This is JPEG, and I'm now going to switch to the 16 to 35. Now this is the 16 to 35 f4. And you can see that it pushed in a little bit. So the 16mm prime is wider than the 16 to 35 at 16. Here is the 16 again, just to show you. And I will go back to the 16 to 35 at 16. There's a 16 to 35 at 16mm. So it is pushing a little bit. Now I'm going to do some video. This video clip right here, this is firstly the 16 to 35 at 16mm. I'm shooting 4K 30p. IPB mode is at f8, ISO 100, 160 shutter speed. This is C-Log 3 with the a LUT, the official Canon LUT put on this, and it's on autofocus. So I think since it's at f8, you can just see that whole rock formation in focus. Nothing really shifts because I'm not moving. I'm on a tripod. What I'm going to do next is I'm not going to move the tripod, not going to move the camera. I'm just going to switch lenses to the 16mm prime, also at f8, the exact same setting. So right now is 16 to 35 at 16. And I'm going to switch to the 16mm now. Boom. Now we're at 16mm prime at f8. All the settings are exactly the same. The lighting conditions might have shifted a little bit with the clouds, but it's exactly the same thing. And now this is still the 16mm prime. The only thing I adjusted is the f-stop. It's now at f11. The sun is completely blown out, but I also wanted to test the dynamic range with the lenses. But 16mm at f11, all the other settings are the same. This is C-Log 3 with the LUT applied. Now I'm going to switch to the 16 to 35 at 16. This is 16 to 35 at 16. This is the zoom lens. I can't tell a huge difference in this shot. I think the water kind of stayed the same, but the rocks on the right side of the frame, it shifted a little bit, the perspective, when I switched lenses. The dynamic range doesn't look like it changed at all. It looks like it's still blown out. So the dynamic range on the lenses, I mean, yeah, the lenses really doesn't affect too much of the dynamic range, but I don't see any difference Now, this is the 16 to 35 prime, 16 to 35 zoom lens at 16 millimeters. I think I only adjusted the f-stop again. I forgot what I'm at. Probably at an f11 or an f8. But here's what it looks like. All the other settings are the same. And in this scene, can't really tell as well. It's just a wide angle shot. Towards the edges, there's slight distortion, but it's pretty straight. The horizon line is pretty straight. Now I switch to the 16 prime. In this particular scene, the horizon line, there is some distortion, but I don't see it as drastic as that first shot where I did see the horizon line to distort towards the edges. But this one, not as bad. This is a 16 millimeter prime. I can't tell the difference really. There's this slight focal change from 16 to 35 to 16 prime, but I don't really notice a difference. Now, this is the brick wall. This is the same brick wall that I shot the photos at. I am 2 to 3 feet away. This is the 16 millimeter prime right now, 16 millimeter prime, and I think I'm at an f4 or an f8 or something. I think I'm at an f4, but look at the distance. I think the distance matters. So when you're really wide, you don't see as dramatic of a difference. But now when I'm closer, look at the lines of the bricks. There, I still see the distortion towards the edges. It's not completely straight. But now I'm going to switch to the 16 to 35. Now this is the 16 to 35 at 16 millimeters. You could see a dramatic push-in. So even though I'm at 16 millimeters, same distance, 2 to 3 feet away, it's not as wide as a 16 millimeter RF prime. I thought that was interesting. So now, I guess if I really want a wide shot at 16, the 16 RF is wider than the 16 to 35 at 16. I'm shooting at an f4 now. This is the widest this lens can get. This is the 16 to 35. I am shooting at 1/200 shutter speed because I want to get the shallowest depth of field I can. This wall is 2 feet. This white wall is 2 feet from the camera. And I'm just going to put in a piece of fruit right in front of the lens to test the autofocus. I'm noticing as I'm focusing that there's lens breathing at 16 millimeter when I'm going this close. The minimum focus distance isn't as close as a 16 prime, but you can see on the edges the lens breathing. It's going in and out. That's called the lens breathing, and it's there. It's slight, but it's there. Now I'm on the 16 millimeter f2.8. I'm shooting at f4, same settings as the 16 to 35, and this is the autofocus. I'm 2 feet from this wall. Getting a piece of fruit. Whoa, the lens breathing on the 16 prime is dramatic. Look at the edges as I get the fruit closer towards camera. The lens breathing, it's going in and out. That's pretty crazy. I'm still shooting with the 16 millimeter, but I'm at f2.8 now, and I had to up the shutter speed to 1/400. But now this is f2.8. Wow, I like this almost macro capability. I am very close to the lens. You can't focus this close with the 16 to 35. It takes a while for the focus to catch on though. But this isn't a human face, it's just a piece of fruit.